I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and Adam Johnson. Oh, I've been reading Adam Johnson for more than a minute. Parasites Like Us was his second book, first novel, and it was a Discover Great New Writers pick back in the day when we called our Discover program that. And if you haven't read that academic satire featuring Hank Hanna and, well, his life on the green and some other things when it comes to researching, anthropology and the Clovis people, and it's one of those academic satires that, yeah, go back and pick it up if you haven't yet. However, you might also know him from The Orphan Master's Son, which won the Pulitzer. There's also a story collection called Fortune Smiles that won the National Book Award. And there's also the first book, which was Emporium, also a collection of stories. The Wayfinder is his new novel, and it is epic, and it is unexpected, and it is not like any of these other books, except for the fact that Adam Johnson is the guy behind it all. And Adam, I'm so happy to see you.
Miwa, happy to see you. Thanks for making this happen. Thanks for showing off your book collection. There's so many beautiful books.
Right? This
I do
is
feel when you see someone's book collection, you see like all of those words have poured through their neural nets, and it
Yep.
changes you to read a book. And I feel like you share something like really profound in common.
It makes me really happy too. These are just some of the books that we featured on the show, actually. And the overlap between my private library and the backdrop here is pretty significant, actually. And we're not even 5 yet, we're 4 and change. But I need to talk to you about The Wayfinder for a second, because I've known about this book for more than a minute. Your new publisher is an old pal of mine. And I remember when he told me he had bought this book, and he's like, it's coming. It's coming. And it's been about 10 years since the last book,
Mhm,
right? Do I have that right?
mhm.
And The Wayfinder is 713 pages. I will say they fly by. But I need to know where this book started for you, because this is not, I mean, I had a little bit of the background, but this is not really what I was expecting.
Yeah, where do books come from? That's a great
Mm-hmm.
question. My students have all sorts of ideas about that. For me, it just comes from obsession. I just become obsessed with the topic, and I usually read and read and read until my uncertainties, my I don't know, but my blank spots become filled, and then I move on to a new obsession. And I became obsessed with North Korea. And the questions I had about North Korea were not about the military or geopolitics, but they were questions about like, how do you fall in love in North Korea? What do you
Right,
have for breakfast?
right.
How do what do you do for fun? You
Mm-hmm.
know? And though I couldn't find the answers.
Right.
And I went deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until I had like spent I just see I was researching a book and I didn't know it, but I spent all my free time trying to figure out like what life was like in North Korea. And then at some
Mm-hmm.
point you fill yourself so much it has to start coming out.
Right.
And I do believe narrative is the great meaning making machine. You fill yourself with voices, with memory, with details, with experience, right?
Yeah.
And they start to formulate themselves into chronologies and causalities, and they start to populate themselves, and they come out in narrative. And it's narrative I don't understand until it begins to formulate it itself. And so the answer to your question is I went to New Zealand, Aotearoa, and
Mm-hmm.
I gave a reading, maybe like a dozen years ago,
Yeah.
and I went to like a Maori space, a
Mm-hmm.
marae, and for a pahiri, which is like a sacred ceremony. And I met like a Maori storyteller there, and she was like mind blowing.
Yeah,
She was
yeah,
like
yeah.
the best storyteller I'd ever heard.
Right.
And I remember thinking, Johnson, your game is low. You have to step it up. Like she entranced me for hours,
Right.
and I was like, how did she do that? Um, and it turned out there were like lots of good reasons why she did it. That her stories were sacred,
Yeah.
right? Those were her people's stories, that they had been entrusted to her, right? And that they had been refined through literally thousands of tellings.
Mm-hmm.
And it really made me think about orality. It
Yep.
made me think about like I have some indigenous roots in America, which have been
Mm-hmm.
very severed. Just to be in New Zealand where everything's written in Maori and English, I was like,
Yeah.
wouldn't we be a different people here in America
Mm-hmm.
if we understood that like our native peoples are like one of the greatest things about our country, you
Yeah.
know? And I feel like that's pervasive, when I'm in New Zealand. And so I just began reading like, how did people get there?
Mm-hmm.
How did the woman I talked to mentioned the canoe that
Yep.
her people had arrived in, the captain of the crew, and the 26 people in her canoe 1,000 years ago.
Right.
And we like to value so much our written history,
Mhm.
but show me a story from the year 1000, right? That I would trust as much.
Well, and also how much of our history have we lost because we don't value the oral tradition the way some other cultures might. And I mean, just because it's not written down doesn't mean it didn't happen, right? Like there's that whole kind of cliche pictures or it didn't happen, well, words or it didn't happen. And
Right.
there are lots of different ways of delivering words. The cast in The Wayfinder is pretty spectacular, and it's smaller than you might expect for an
Mhm.
epic novel. But we've got class covered, we've got gender, we've got a little bit of magical
A
realism.
class and gender covered.
We do. We're on islands. Come on, we're on islands. What? How? 1,000 years ago?
Well, we do get, yeah, it does, the book does take place before there's contact with the Western world, so they have
Right.
no sense that there are other peoples with other ways.
Hmm.
We do go to like Rotuma. There's this
Yeah.
Samoan character, Tonga, Fiji, characters who are kind of Moriori, and
Hmm.
so we do get to like, you know, see like
Uh-huh.
what these different corners of the Pacific would be like.
But all these different corners of the Pacific remind me of right now. I mean, that's part of why I opened with class and gender because, some of this is not new, right?
Mm,
Some of it is deeply familiar. I
mhm.
mean, and fathers and sons, stories of fathers and sons never get old, right?
One of the things I noticed when I just began like reading about the peopling of the Pacific is a story
Hmm.
that just repeated over and over. And it would be that a people would find a new island.
Yeah,
Those were not easy to find.
right.
We could talk about navigation. These islands had never seen mammals. Usually, the
Hmm.
only mammal on an island was a bat
Right.
that could fly there. They would be filled with turtles and big, juicy birds that couldn't fly.
Hmm.
People would move there, and there was a lot of free calories. And for a few generations, there was a population boom. These were actually delicate ecosystems. They would then
Hmm.
collapse, and then people, if they didn't like keep teaching navigation, they would be trapped on these islands, and they would have to begin making difficult decisions. Uh, they would have to learn to live within their means. They would become in conflict for food
Hmm.
internally or externally, or
Hmm.
they would become displaced. And those are things that we're facing now. Extinctions, scarcity,
Hmm.
conflict,
Hmm.
displacements. And so I really felt like this is a way to write about a lot of the challenges of the world today,
Yeah,
but by decontextualizing them
yeah, which
from
I love.
technology and politics and
Hmm.
blame.
Hmm. No, it's putting the humanity first, right? Like we don't actually get distracted. I mean, yes, you could argue there are a couple of weapons that are probably high tech for the moment, right? But it really is about the people. It really is about the story. I mean, we've got Kore. How do I pronounce her name?
Oh, the Maori has elongated vowels, so her
Okay,
name would be Kororo.
Kororo.
But
Okay,
we have an accentual syllabic language in English, so
right.
we would
Okay,
say Carrero, like
all
that's
right.
how we would say it.
Herrera. I love this girl. I love this girl.
Yeah.
But she also, her world is her world. She knows her people. She knows her island. She knows this piece of it.
Mhm.
And then we've got outsiders show up in their canoe. And suddenly she's asking questions she's never asked before. Like, what does this mean? Who
Mhm.
are we? Are we normal? Who are those people? What are their expectations? And so immediately we're in a situation where, I mean, good stuff is coming. But that conflict, right? That existential, who am I? Who are you? Where are we going? And oh, by the way, that boy's kind of cute.
Yeah. How big is the world and what's in it?
Right.
Two characters show up and they casually mention slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, "Is that real? Do people really
Right.
enslave one another? Could that
Right.
be true?"
Right.
And these are questions like we all have to, we all have to face at some point, and like real, true innocence in the world, and how do you lose your innocence without losing your sense of right and wrong is a question I've had. As I wrote this book over like 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
my kids went from being, whatever, 6, 8, 10 to like
Right.
they're all off at college. And over around the dinner table all those years, there were
Mm-hmm.
like topics that we would recur.
Yeah.
What's up with the world?
Right.
I remember my youngest daughter became obsessed with snow leopards. She would be like, "Oh my God!"
Okay.
Every night at dinner, she would tell us new facts about snow leopards. And then one night
Mm-hmm.
she was like, there are 250 snow leopards. She said, "Is that a lot?"
Oh.
And I was like, "Is this the point? Like, at what point how do I share the fact that there's going
Right.
to be no snow leopards one day?
Right.
It's
Right.
just the truth. And do I let her have illusions?
Mm-hmm.
What are my duties?
Right.
Also, like, I have tenure at a university, so our lives are kind of stable. We're not
Mm-hmm.
rich, um, but all these conversations about like who has what in the world, and why
Right.
don't other people have stuff, and why do we have more than other people, and what's our duty to the homeless people in our neighborhood, and
Right.
and how do we engage the world? Can we make a difference? Like basic questions that were around the table every day that worked into our writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have two families. Kororo's family,
Yep.
like they do not have much.
Mm-mm.
They are trying to live within their means, and it means hard choices. And their path of diminishment to this place is a painful one, and there's conflict in their past, and they've changed who they are,
Mm-hmm.
which has made them vulnerable. And then there's this other group that's also, the Tongans,
Right.
and they're the Tongan Islands, if you look them up on a map, are very small.
Right.
And what the way they dealt with scarcity was going and taking other people's stuff and making a pharaohic empire of the Pacific, a thalassocracy.
Mm-hmm.
And they dominated hundreds of islands. And so I have like Kororo's like a teenager in one family, just
Mm-hmm.
trying to figure things out. And I have the king's sons in Tonga who are just starting to wonder, where does all our good stuff come from?
Right. I love this idea of navigation as metaphor. And I
Hmm.
think too, when you come from a place that's landlocked, right, your experience of the world is really, really different than if you lived on, say, the ocean, right? If you stand on the edge of the ocean and watch what happens during a storm, although please don't stand too close, but just sort of the visuals, right? The sea being the sea and doing what it's going to do, or watching waves break, or any of these kinds of things, right? It is not quite the same as you're standing in the middle of a plain, and yes, there are other weather challenges in the Great Plains. So it's just the idea that you don't see the next piece of land,
Hmm.
right?
Right.
That there is water for miles and miles. And also we're talking about canoes that don't, yes, they're helped along by sail, but there's also a lot of human power that goes into it. So the idea of getting a canoe without an engine from point A to point B
Uh,
is pretty significant in
yeah.
this context.
Yeah. I mean, to sail from, Tahiti to Rapa Nui would be
Right.
like sailing in a homemade canoe from
Right.
LA to New York
Right.
and seeing nothing in between. Yeah.
So let's talk about the research for a second, because obviously you get access to the world in a very different way from your characters. We have airplanes, we have the internet, we have research libraries, we have, where do you even start once you have this experience of the story from the Maori storyteller?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, you start with the books,
Mhm.
but where do the books get you? Like, is that the
Oh, yeah.
library step? Is that I'm on the plane going to see what's out there?
Right. Well, I mean, there's a right point to do field work
Hmm.
in which you know enough to ask the right
Right.
questions, to see past the easy stories.
Hmm.
Um, I remember like I wrote this book, The Orphan Master's Son, which was about North Korea, and I went to finally got to North Korea just about halfway, about 3.5 years of research. Then when I got there, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I knew the histories of everything I saw.
Hmm.
That was felt true of like going to the Pacific for me too. Like I just, but again, as I read for a year or two,
Yeah.
I think I'm just doing pleasure reading. Does that make sense? It's
Okay,
just
it
like,
does. No, it absolutely does. I'm imagining too what some of those histories look like. I mean, I've gone down rabbit holes for the show and ended up
Mhm.
in places where I was like, "Oh, this is delightful," but what am I doing here? But I love the idea of seeing it as pleasure reading.
Well, like Cook's journals. Cook is a
Yeah.
very fascinating person with
Hmm.
naturalists on board. He's actually a fairly forward-thinking man of his time.
Hmm.
He does like talk about a voyage in an 86-foot boat. When he lands in Hawaii, the king comes out to meet him in a 200-foot boat.
Right. Right.
And when Cook goes to Tonga, he marvels that the canoes they have are actually the fastest canoes he has ever seen in his life. They're pulling like 12 knots. They're going like
Yeah.
15, 16 miles an hour, which
Hmm.
is his ship is doing 4 knots.
Right.
These boats are doing circles around him of a design he's never seen. He's never seen an outrigger. He's never seen this crab claw sloop design. They're all homemade. He cannot believe it. He's in awe of it.
Yeah.
One thing I would just put in here is that in researching this book, I really kind of questioned this world we live in which we think we know everything.
Yeah.
And we think we are so smart. We have all this technology. But do we?
Right.
I became aware of how much we've forgotten. And I actually think that, like, because on my iPhone I have 50,000 photos, literally,
Right. Yeah.
I feel like I offload my memory.
Hmm.
And because Wikipedia stores every fact in the world, I feel like I remember less because I don't need to. It would be a waste of brain
Hmm.
space. Um, but I do remember when I was a kid, my family's from South Dakota. When I would go
Yep.
back to South Dakota, like my grandparents, they knew every tree, every
Hmm.
flower. They could hear any bird and know exactly what it was, and they
Hmm.
would know, oh, they're about to migrate. They just by living on the land, they were really in
Hmm.
tune with a kind of knowledge. My students couldn't name a tree for their lives, and yeah,
I mean, I sit in between your grandparents and your students. I was actually just having this conversation not long ago with a friend, but I think of stone fruits as beach fruit because when I was a kid, like cherries, plums, nectarines, all of it, that was the fruit that you took to the beach in New England because that's what was ripe in that
right,
moment. And part of me is kind of delighted that I can have whatever I want whenever I want it in terms of fruits and vegetables now, but honestly, they taste better when they're in season. And one of my cousins and I were together recently, and we used to get boxes of citrus from an aunt in Florida because back in the day you actually
right,
could not you needed someone to do this for you in order to have grapefruit in January or oranges in January. And it
right.
was an absolute delight and we were very fortunate to have this. But at the same time, the idea that you needed someone to be able to order this and have it shipped to you in the Northeast and in New York because it just didn't exist. And I mean, it tasted great. Really.
But, but what are the rhythms of the world then?
Right.
What are the seasons? And you know, to write this book was to forget about clocks,
Yeah.
windows,
Yeah.
calendars, compasses, all those kind of metaphors, and to think with the cycle of the moon,
Hmm.
the rotation of the earth, to think of generations.
Hmm.
Um, I loved that time scale. I
Hmm.
loved how deep it was, how useful it was. The Hawaiians had a name for every night of the moon.
Oh,
Um,
wow. Okay.
that really made a lot of sense. And the Maori and the Tongans would say, "Oh, this is a non-fishing moon,
Hmm.
right?" Or this is when you feel this wind, it's time to plant your sweet potatoes. And so, like and we have a name for every star that we've all agreed upon. But
Right.
like in Tonga, there would be, let's say, Sirius would be the star, and we would name that Tu Samoa. Like that's the star that's going to take us, follow that.
Yep.
But in Samoa, that star was called Tu Vanuatu because they were in a different part of the map. And they used that star for different things. And so like the natural world, even seabirds, there were certain seabirds like a
Hmm.
noddy or a booby that would fly a certain distance from land. And if you saw that bird, even if you couldn't see an island, you knew there was an island within
Hmm.
30 miles. But then there were like pelagic birds, like the albatross or the
Hmm.
tropic bird or the frigate bird that just flew forever, the petrel, and they could tell you nothing. And so, like the Tongans gave them all the same name, the Tevake, like because those birds weren't useful to them in their lives.
And yet, when they disappeared, they noticed because there wasn't anything to eat. I mean, starvation is real.
Yeah.
Starvation is absolutely, resources absolutely run out. There is only so much you can do. So the idea that navigation is leaving is the thing that saves you.
Hmm. Well, um, in Tonga, 26 species of birds went extinct.
Hmm.
Tonga is the word for south,
Okay.
so people like moved from the north. They found this new southern set of islands, and they were really great for a while. If you think about New Zealand or Aotearoa,
Hmm.
the land of the long white cloud, the people who went there because of conflict,
Hmm.
made
Hmm.
this 1,800 mile open ocean voyage in a direction no one had ever found anything or returned from.
Hmm.
Like total desperation. New Zealand's big.
Right.
They find this great, awesome place. Um, it's filled with a bird called a moa, which is like
Okay.
if a giraffe was a bird. They're 12 feet tall.
I did not know that, but okay.
Yeah. Flightless. Because there were no mammals, like birds filled these large herbivore
Okay.
positions, like, we would think of a deer or a buffalo. And so there were four kinds of moa. There
Okay.
were millions of them. And that bird alone allowed the population of the Maori to explode tremendously.
Okay.
But then the moa disappeared, and the other moa disappeared, and then other birds. And
Hmm.
by the time contact came, like the Maori were eating fern roots and snails
Right.
and fighting with each other for everything.
All of this is a way to say you've grounded this story, you've grounded the Wayfinder in real details, sure, but one of the things I've always loved about reading you is that you create this world. And I've said this before on the show, but I don't think world building should be limited to science fiction and fantasy. Like any novel is world building, right? And there are things that I notice you doing. There's magical realism. There are characters who do come back from the dead. The afterlife is a very real experience in this book. And there's some other surprises. I mean, obviously I'm going to let folks discover some of it. But the idea that we are outside of what we might expect, right? Like you can read the history, you can read the natural histories, you can read, sort of the classical anthropological studies and what have you. But the idea then that you've got to turn it into a story that beats with in some ways a truer heart, right? Like it's not just the facts that pull us through, it's not just the history, it's not just the anthropology. It is in fact the truth of the character story.
Right.
And there's a lot of invention and a lot of surprise and a lot of, well, there are a couple of folks I was shaking my fist at more than once. There's a lot of poetry in this book,
Hmm.
and it feels very you. All of it feels very you. And I want to spend some time with the layering of the actual story elements and how you find the truth of the thing. I mean, obviously you have the framework, you have the reference, you have the natural world, you have all of that, but these characters are really purely who they are and who maybe you envisioned them to be, but I sort of feel like they took over and did their own thing.
Well, that was a big question with many
Hmm.
parts, and maybe we can roam through some of that.
Okay.
Let's say that, again, the novel does the work.
Yeah.
I just put my fears, my concerns,
Hmm.
my love, my hopes, my obsessions, my interests. I put that stuff into it, and I don't know what the next scene's going
Hmm.
to yield. I don't know what a character is going to say. If I know that stuff too early, I get bored and I just
Okay.
quit. So the feeling of failure is there at every turn. Like, how is this book going to come out? Where is it going to go? How's it going to pull itself off? How are the elements going to combine? into making something that matters. I really don't know that, and that's a really anxiety producing way to go. Uh,
Hmm.
I can tell when someone's written a book by an outline.
Yeah.
I can just tell. And I don't want to read a book that didn't cause the author great anxiety and uncertainty
Hmm.
and make them rise to the
Hmm.
moment of what they've created and bet to better themselves. Um, but you know, to write a book as a dad means
Yeah.
you've got to sit in the dark for a certain number of hours a day, while
Hmm.
in another part of the house, the people who are real, not
Hmm.
your friends, who love you and need you, are existing without you.
Right.
And so like that trade-off that but of course, as a writer, I'm asking someone to stop living his or her life,
Hmm.
ours, to live the life I've created. So it's the burden I'm asking someone else to bear to
Right.
that this is worth stopping living to read, right? But you know, you can't live life and write it at the same time. And
Hmm.
like what it is to be a dad, what are the sacrifices of these things? What choices? We only have one life. There's only a single path. Um, you know, I know a writer who's like, Jesus Christ, I if I only could have written one more book. He's a little older, you know,
Oh,
a
okay.
writer who's a little older, and he's like, I wish I would have written a few less, you know.
Oh, that's okay. That's really interesting.
So
That
like
I
these, it's like what's going through my life are the things that I put in, you know, like
right.
they're all my concerns. Um, when it terms when you talk about like bringing people back from the dead, like
Hmm.
when I look at Tongan mythology,
Yeah.
like I had mythology is what we would say at a university where I teach.
Right.
But these are sacred stories that have stayed around, and you know they were still haunting the islands even post Christianity.
Yeah.
And you know there was a story of a man who would go around, and while men were off at war, he had a tattoo of a jellyfish on his hand, and he would assault their wives and
Hmm.
mark them
Right.
so that their husbands would know. And like that story, which I don't know that I completely understand until the book made sense of it for me.
Right. Right. Right.
Um, there's a reason people kept telling it. It was
Yeah.
like a scary story,
Hmm.
and one of their. So I have to take that as valid. Like it served my characters' people for countless generations,
Yep.
and it's still serving them. And it's not mythology; it's real. And so if I read about a talking parrot, well, then that's real.
Hmm.
One of the fascinating things in, you know, the Tongan, cosmogony is like their main god, Hikuleo, is
Okay.
both male and female, blind and all-seeing.
Hmm.
They live on an island that's difficult to get to, that's bathed in purple light. And Hikuleo had a river that could bring people back to life. And he also had a fan that was called Itumai, the life affecting fan.
Yep.
And by wafting it on a tree, the tree would blossom. But if he drew air, the tree would wither. And there's like a Promethean legend of a girl named Lolonga Vava'u who
Hmm.
goes to the underworld and steals Hikuleo's fan and
Hmm.
brings it back into the world
Yeah.
and never to return. And the god sees it and doesn't see it. He can stop it, but he doesn't stop it. He's also a she. And so that fan is walking around in my story.
Yeah.
And the novel had to decide under whose auspices could we entrust such power.
Well, I liked where it ended up. I do like where it ended up. But I want to talk about power for a second because Aho, who is, he is the father of one of the characters that I got very attached to. But he is a warrior and he is very complicated and very scary. And he is also, he holds a name that if someone does say his name to you, you really kind of don't want to hear it because something bad is coming, kind of thing.
Mm.
And yet he's not, it's not that simple. Like
Mhm.
he has an arc. He has there is development. There's a moment too where he takes one of his sons out and says, I'm going to show you how to make pottery. I'm going to show you how to make something beautiful and useful. And then they get a little sidetracked.
Mhm.
But he is not a simple guy. None of these characters are simple. None of these characters appears all good, all bad, anything. They're very human. But Aho does, he embodies too this sort of fundamental conflict between sort of the idea of death and violence, right? Like they are not synonymous. Duty and sacrifice, not synonymous. Death and violence, not synonymous. Like there is a level of nuance in the language for all of your characters that I wouldn't mind bringing back into conversation now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't
Yeah.
mind seeing more of that in the 21st century. It's like we don't necessarily handle nuance quite the way we used to.
Mhm. I do think in like some of our like in classical literature, birth
Mhm.
order really matters. The first
Yeah.
daughter, the second daughter, the first son, the second son.
Yeah.
They have like their destinies are cast,
Mhm. Mhm.
in Shakespeare or Gilgamesh from the
Yep.
beginning. Aho's a second son. There's a saying in Polynesia: the firstborn is born to rule the land, and the secondborn is born to find new land.
Mhm.
And even in the days of primogeniture in England, like you would, okay, the second son, he's going to become a priest, right?
Yeah.
Get rid of that person.
That's Asia, that's Europe,
Right. Yeah.
that's or you left New York and you went to California because there was nothing for you. If you're
Right.
the second son, you may as well just go to Vermont. There's
Right.
nothing here.
So, the older brother who's the king sends
Mhm.
his younger brother who's the sensitive brother. He
Mhm.
sends him to war, and at Stanford, I have, taught a class for and worked with veterans on campus a great deal,
Mhm.
to try to help them tell their stories. I teach in a writing program called the like Wallace Stegner Fellowship for
Yeah.
Writing. Wallace Stegner, he founded the second creative writing class in America. He was at
Mhm.
Iowa, which was the first writing program.
Yep.
And in 1946, he founded our creative writing program exclusively for veterans returning from World War II. And for the first 5 years of our creative writing program, it was nothing but veterans trying to process their experience.
Mhm.
And I've just tried to like be in tune with that history by working with veterans. And they have experiences that can't be translated exactly through narrative to people who haven't had those experiences. They're deeply isolating. They, uh, if they're in a deployment,
Mhm.
they know how things work. Things, even though it's scary and dangerous, it actually makes sense to them. What soon doesn't make sense is this world that we exist in. And one of the veterans told me once, he said, "Oh, if only I could have taken my family to war with me, they would know who I am now." To this veteran student, um, the he felt so isolated
Mhm.
from the people he was close to
Mhm.
that it was even conceivable that if they'd just seen a little bit of combat, then they'd know who he had been. And those relations wouldn't have been
Yeah.
broken. And so I I have Aho. He
Yeah.
takes his son to war with him.
Yeah.
When it wasn't, I did read a legend of Fijians who would take their boys to war with them because they weren't safe back in the villages. And so it's depicted in which a father goes to son with his war with his son tied to him, so that he's protected at all times. That is something I really wanted to contemplate. There's a lot of contemplation about a veteran who
Mhm.
comes home from the Fijian Wars. He is a changed man. He's a dangerous man. Nobody understands him.
Mm.
He's a deeply feeling man. And the only way he believes he can share what happened to him is honestly to hurt other people.
Right. Right. Masculinity takes so many different forms in this novel. And there's so many questions about masculinity and how it's presented and what it represents and how it connects to power and how it doesn't connect to power. And it's such a universal dislocation, I think is the word I'm looking for. It feels like we're seeing this even now.
Mm.
Um, fathers and sons, right? There's a reason that it's like stories of, we never get tired of stories of fathers, mothers and daughters, mothers and like parents and children, right? That is such a fundamental relationship. And here you are saying a minute ago, like, I'm thinking about my kids at the dinner table. I'm thinking about my kids. I'm thinking about how I protect my children from a world that in some ways is much easier to navigate than the world of the Wayfinder, but in other ways is so much more complicated. And
Well, my father wasn't always around as much as I would
right,
have liked, and
right,
as a young man growing up and becoming a writer in academia, like I always fell under the spell of a man of a certain age.
yeah, yeah,
And those turned out to be, my writing mentors. They were
yeah,
almost always like a generation older than me. They had done things that I wanted to do. They were thoughtful and wise people who gave me time, who
mhm,
encouraged me. And, you know, as I said, while sitting with my headphones on and my sweats in a dark room while my kids are like, how do I get my bike fixed? And
right,
I'm ignoring them like a heel, like a horrible human. Like, uh, in my book, I have a king and he's got three sons, and he
yeah,
decides, I'm going to make one of them king and I've got to mentor him. And I'm going to give surrogate dads to the other two, which is
right,
something I don't know if I've ever seen that. Um, but so, one son, he's like, hey, you're going to become a navigator. I'm going to give
hmm,
you to an old navigator, and he
yep,
is going to spend 10 years raising you. And to his other son, who's like a little dangerous, he decides to give him to a poet,
yep,
maybe soften his rough edges,
mhm,
and ends up making a warrior poet. But this idea that, like, dream that I would have, that I could have it all,
yep.
I play out through the king, and it doesn't work. It turns out it's not a good strategy to farm your children's raising out to other people.
No, it's not a great strategy, but it's a great read. Watching
Yeah.
these characters evolve. Because also, I kept being surprised. And part of that, part of it, every reader brings their own experience to a story, right? Like we all, and I have zero experience of this history or this. I can find things on a map, sure. I
Mhm.
have a fascination with the tattooing that is a part of the culture because you don't necessarily choose your tattoo, it chooses you, which I
Mhm.
think is a completely original, interesting way of being
Right.
part of the world, right? And that's also a piece of storytelling that, certainly here isn't quite how it works. Um, but I was so consumed by these people and the choices that they made. And there were times where I was like, oh, I don't agree with this. But there were other moments where I was like, of course, this is exactly what you're going to do. This is terrific. The women are outstanding. Um, they are not interested in being sort of secondary characters. They all have their own kind of place in the world, which I appreciated. And they really can hold their own. They're just like, okay, you over, sit down for 2 seconds. I have a plan.
Mhm.
And some of them have real power.
Mhm.
Some of them do have real power. And watching the intersections of dreams
Mhm.
and the intersection of dream and plan, right? Like you've got characters who are like, of course, this is the thing I'm going to do. And then, well, then sometimes it doesn't always work the way they see it. Did you surprise yourself at all as you were? I feel like there are moments where you couldn't have expected things to fall into place quite the way they did, and not just on
Mm.
the water.
Well, I've always been interested in family. You
Hmm.
know, I'm a single child of only child who's, And on my mom's native side, there's complete divorce from a huge family there.
Right.
Only over the last years have I got to know some of those people
Hmm.
wonderfully. And my dad's side had much more populated, but he wasn't close. He was my connective tissue. So I've always
Right.
felt like a very alone person. And I was the kind of kid who like would find a friend with four brothers and eat dinner at their house every night.
Right.
My mom was like a single mom trying to survive, working
Right.
long hours. Um, so making big families always matters to me.
Hmm.
I wanted to have kids. I have three kids.
Hmm.
I'm living my dream. You know, but to the women in the story, like in Tonga culture, there's
Hmm.
this the aunt is called the fahu, right?
Okay.
And there's a guy in the family who has all the power, but the ranking aunt, the fahu, she has all the rank, and
Okay.
so she has the prestige, even though she has no power. And yet she can't be overruled. And so, like, just in Tongan families, if you go on TikTok and you like type in Fahu aunt, like you'll see thousands of Tongan kids complaining about their aunts, and like because their aunts, they have to obey their aunts, right? No matter
Okay.
what. And
Okay.
an aunt can like adopt a kid out of another family and say, "Oh, we're taking that kid," or say, "Oh, you're gonna be raised by the neighbors, where you're a better fit for them." They can make powerful decisions, and they can't really be overruled. And so, in my novel, I have like an all-powerful king. I mean, Tonga had like 27 kings, like pharaohs, all powerful.
Okay.
You have to think of like Egypt in the middle of the Pacific, right?
Hmm.
But his aunt outranks him, and he has to bow down to her at every turn. He has to do what she says. He has to get approval of her things. It's a total pain in his ass, but it's a really interesting way to rule. I mean, you can
Yeah.
see how the society would want to put this check and balance on people in power. But she happens to have at the beginning of the novel this all-powerful fan from a god, and so she's poor. She tries to live within her means. She's trying to save the creatures going extinct on her island. She's trying to be a model for living sustainably instead of taking other islands. She's trying to get people to question the morality of some of the things they do. But she also has to do some dastardly things to keep worse things from happening. And one of the things I loved is that I was like, suddenly I had an all-powerful fan in my book. And after the men fight and people
Hmm.
die, she will go to kind of the battlefield or go to the corpses and bring them back to life and interrogate them and ask them all
Right.
these questions. And so it was a really wonderful way to use real culture
Hmm.
and real oral history
Yep.
to take it seriously and say what would be the implications of that narratively. And so it's a great plot device. We learn all kinds of wonderful
Yeah.
things. Plus, people, when they die and then they're brought briefly back to life, are very philosophical,
Hmm.
humorous. And those were some of my favorite scenes. I was like, what is this person going to say when he's brought back to life? And they're invariably men.
Well, they are, but they are deeply entertaining. You have, in multiple points in the book, too, this idea of the missing story. At one point, we're making a decision about who gets onto a waka to go exploring and who stays behind. And there's a different point, too, where dad says, well, we can't let them leave. They have too much to teach us.
Mm.
And so this refrain of the missing story, right? Whether it's the court, the king's court, or even this tiny island, or even Hine, which is Kokoro's friend. Like her parents have died, but she is the ward of this older woman who's blind and is like, well, I'm just going to stay with her. I'm fine. I'm good. But all of the stories that are missing, no one quite knows what happened exactly to Hine's parents, or it's all of this. You're asking us to work on two levels, and then like there's the piece that we know, there are the pieces of the story that we get, right? And then there's also information that you're just not going to hand over, and bringing the two together, right? Like, what do we know? Who do we know? What are our expectations? Like, Aho kept surprising me. I was like, I think this guy is going to be exactly this kind of person with no care, and yet there's this whole poetry subplot happening with him, and I didn't want to leave any of these people, but I wanted you to give me as much of the silence and the missing stories as I had with the characters that were presented to me. Right.
There's a kind of moment in the book when the king and his brother, like they've kind of resolved that they're not
Uh-huh.
going to solve the problems, and one of them has to kill another one.
Right.
But beforehand, they like sit down on a log on a path in the moonlight and like have a long conversation. It was like the
Hmm.
most beautiful, thoughtful, brotherly conversation.
Hmm.
And then at the end, they're like, "Okay, it's
Now we got
time."
to do a thing.
Right? Yeah, and like you know, the fight is what happens in Hollywood movies. The reason
Right.
we turn to books are those
Hmm.
conversations, and what happens before and
Hmm.
after.
Hmm.
Um, I will say, my grandfather, my maternal grandfather, like they were all like Norwegians, cranky Norwegians in South Dakota, and
Okay.
he married a Lakota woman,
Hmm. Okay.
was my grandmother, and she left my mom when my mom was 4, and so my mom never really saw her again, and I never met her, and
Hmm.
I remember my grandpa took me to the cemetery where all the McKeechis were buried in his small part of South Dakota. And there were 3 guys who were buried way over in the corner. And he was like,
Okay.
"Yeah, those 3 guys are the coyotes." And he said, "We wouldn't let them be buried next to us." And I said, "Why?" He said, "I don't really remember." He
Right.
said, "They did some bad stuff, but I maybe it'll come to me, but I forget, you know?"
Right.
And I just like the idea that you could forget what
Right.
made you bury people away from you. The idea that that not one story came from the reservation,
Right.
like nothing. There could be nothing. You know, that has always um, saddened me, but kind of outraged me too.
Right.
And when I was reading about North Korea, if I'd have found the book that told me what it was like to fall in love there,
Right.
found the book that answered my questions, I would have stopped searching.
Yeah.
But it turned out, like in all of English speaking culture, I could not find a humanizing narrative of a North Korean.
Mm.
There were some interviews that were online, and it turned out I just had to make it.
Right.
And the narrative of who of the missing story is just it offends me, and it is often the source of my writing. Is there's something I just cannot pierce through any other way, and I've got to use research and imagination to make it. And it doesn't say to me this is right,
Hmm.
but because it's art and it's an artistic form, it's meaningful.
Right.
I can't vouch for its accuracy, but at the end of writing this book, so much rightness came to me.
Hmm.
And I think it would come to a reader too, even though they're not of my experience.
But also, do we need factual accuracy in a novel? I mean, isn't the world that gets built more, I don't know, is important really the word I want? I think we need to give people a starting point, and sometimes fiction is the easiest way to do that,
Mhm.
right?
Well,
Like, you can use Frankenstein as a metaphor for pretty much anything, right? You can use Moby Dick as a metaphor for anything. Like, think of how many biblical stories get retold in like Steinbeck
right.
or Shakespeare, and I'm throwing out examples, but I feel like there is so much possibility here. And actually, Sean, Sean, your publisher, is like, think of the Russians, think of The Stand by Stephen King and the Russians. And I'm like, actually, it works. I mean, the worlds are wildly different, but the human experience of, War and Peace, and The Stand. I mean, you're never far away from the people.
Like when I would interview North Koreans,
Mm-hmm.
actors, the thing that surprised me is how much we had in common.
Yeah.
I assumed, oh, we're going to have, because we had different backgrounds and experiences, but no, I could not believe the humor, the
Right.
sensibilities. And I do believe that if we were to meet fellow Homo sapiens from 300,000 years ago, we
Right.
would find the exact same thing. So under that premise, like,
Yeah.
um, I can project my humanity into North
Mm.
Korea. Like these concerns are universal,
Hmm.
and I can channel enough humanity to breathe life into a society that has been vastly changed, you
Right.
know, and I can believe it. Even like, in North Korea, like I could get sources for facts, but they couldn't be confirmed because nothing
Right.
there is confirmable. Um, so like, but it is North Korea, and I do believe readers went there thinking, "Is this North Korea?"
Right.
Because I didn't set it in a fictional
Hmm.
country, and I,
Right.
I am, placing this in cultural context and real places in a real time, and people are going to wonder, "Wow, is Fiji like this?"
Right.
And to the best of my knowledge, it is, but what you're going to find there is yourself because it's literary fiction. That's what matters.
I'm tempted to let you leave on that note, Adam, because I love the idea of finding your humanity in literary fiction. I mean, that's why I read. I read so I can connect with ideas that I may not recognize immediately. I read to find, the truth of my own life and the details of someone else's, right? Like that's the thing that when you have that aha moment when you're reading. And I love the idea that someone anywhere in the world is going to pick up this book and be like, so what did this guy do? And wait, what? And then, though, want to turn around and talk about it with someone else.
Well, when two people have run a narrative through their neural net, whether if you've met someone who's read Shakespeare or Beowulf, I do believe this forms our minds in a certain way. You have the same kinds of pathways, and you've spent the same kind of time and experiences together. You share something in common, that's deeply literary. And if we had more of that, I mean, I used to go to people's houses for parties and see all their books and just like say, "Oh my God," right? But the bookshelves are disappearing, and so it's more important than ever that we have like rich literary commonality.
And that's what you and I are going to keep trying to do. Adam, it was so great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over.
Thank you much. Cheers.
Hello, readers. It's time for another TBR Top Off. We're going to recommend a couple of great books to pick up when you stop in for your copy of The Wayfinder. I'm Mark at my Barnes & Noble store in Cincinnati, and I'm joined by my book buddy Donald over in Detroit. Hello, Donald. How are you?
Hi, Mark. Hi, everybody.
So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. I'm really excited for people to read The Wayfinder. It is so lovely. It made me want to recommend a book, Moloka'i by Alan Brennert. This is a fantastic, fantastic book and really another gorgeous epic grounded in human resilience. So in the mid to late 1800s, many folks who contracted leprosy were banished to a isolated Hawaiian island called Moloka'i. They were essentially dumped on the shore with no belongings, no shelter, and really no hope for survival. However, over the decades, these people built settlements and started to work towards betterment. Our protagonist, a very young and recently diagnosed Rachel, is pulled from her family and shipped off to this island. There she finds a near thriving society and community of patients and caregivers. I'm not going to say too much more because there are some plot things that go on in this book that are really intense and wonderful. But just know that this book is historically infuriating, emotionally ravaging, and absolutely beautiful. There is also a sequel if you really, really love it, but this is a book that you will not soon forget. So check out Moloka'i by Alan Brennert. Donald, what do you have for us?
Well, that's a perfect pick, Mark. And The Wayfinder is one of those uniquely beautiful books that only come around maybe once a year, maybe once every couple of years. And it made me immediately think of a book that I read a couple years ago. Everybody at this point should know it. But if you're one of those few that have missed the bandwagon on this, the pick that I'm talking about this week is The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese. This book is epic in the best possible way. It's big, it's multi-generational, it takes place over 100 plus years. It is almost fantastical in its storytelling. There's a map, much like the Wayfinder has a map, and it takes you to a place that exists but yet feels so unique and special and makes you want to go to all these places. He's best known for his book Cutting for Stone, which was a huge bestseller. But this one, even more so. It's even better than that. It, at the end of the day, is really just simply a book that is about love, faith, medicine, which is a really interesting added bit of storytelling to this, because it really goes through all the different ways that medicine has advanced over the centuries or over the decades. And it follows 3 generations of a family seeking the answers to a very unique secret, which gives it that kind of almost fantasy-like element, because when you stumble upon that part in the story, you're like, oh, that is so fascinating, and yet then you want to dive into some actual historical reference and realize it's not as fantastical as it may seem. It's told from multiple different viewpoints, so it's really hard to talk about any one particular character. But a big force in the story is a character named Bigamichi, and she's kind of like the matriarch of this entire clan. If you were to try to sum this character up, she's like the godfather of this world, of this particular book, right? Just larger than life. Everybody comes to her. She's an important central figure in a story that has just dozens of people. But then to simplify it is really, again, love about love. It's about joy. It's about being part of a community. And at nearly 800 pages, it wasn't long enough. So that was The Covenant of Water by Abraham Verghese.
Oh, great choice. I love that book so much. And you're right, it just kind of fits in very beautifully with The Wayfinder. I think they could live on the shelf next to each other if there was a subsection in our store for beautiful epics. So nice choice. But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Poured Over. Please make sure to follow us and give us a rating. We don't want you to miss any episodes. We've got some great interviews on the docket. You can also follow us on our socials at Barnes & Noble. I'm Mark. You can follow my home store at BN Westchester. Donald, where can we find you?
You can follow my home store at BN Livonia.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Happy reading. Bye.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.